Do you think medieval prisons were all bars, chains, and sophisticated interrogation tools? But in castles, most prisoners did not die from iron or someone else's evil will. They died in complete silence when physics and thermodynamics became their main enemies. It was a slow, inevitable death without blankets or heating, surrounded by stone walls that drained life away drop by drop. While life continued outside with fires burning and people eating and sleeping, time stood still inside the dungeon, turning into an endless struggle to stay warm. History knows thousands of examples when the impregnable walls of castles became not a defense, but a freezer for those who found themselves inside. Cold knows no mercy. It cannot be negotiated with, and it does not accept confessions in exchange for warmth. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn why thick walls were more terrifying than any executioner, and how exactly the cold killed a person without leaving a single scratch on the body. What if I told you that everything you believed about the reliability of stone walls is not true? We are used to thinking of stone as a symbol of reliability and protection, but in the context of a prison cell, it became the perfect conductor of cold. Medieval builders constructed castles to withstand sieges, but paid no attention to climate control for prisoners. Massive blocks of limestone or granite have enormous thermal inertia, accumulating cold during the long winter months. Even when spring arrived outside and the air warmed up, deep winter continued to reign inside the casemate. The walls acted as a giant cold accumulator that could not be warmed up by one person's breath. The walls in the dungeons could be several meters thick, completely isolating the room from outside heat. Sunlight never touched the interior masonry, and the stone remained damp and icy all year round. In such conditions, the air temperature inside the cell was often lower than outside, especially at night. This created the effect of a cellar, where food is stored for a long time and a living organism begins to slowly fade away. A person pressing their back against such a wall lost heat at a catastrophic rate. Moisture was a constant companion in stone prisons, saturating the entire space from floor to ceiling. Groundwater often seeped through the masonry, creating unfrozen puddles of icy slush on the floor. This damp air had much higher thermal conductivity than dry air, which greatly intensified the feeling of cold. Every molecule of water in the air worked like a microscopic thief, stealing the body's precious energy. The prisoners' clothes instantly became damp, ceasing to perform their warming function. In the deep dungeons or oubliettes, there was no circulation of warm air from the surface. Heavy, cold air sank down and stagnated there for centuries, creating a dead atmosphere. Any attempt to warm up by moving only led to the person breathing in this icy condensation more actively. The lungs cooled from the inside, lowering the overall body temperature faster than the external cold did. It was a trap from which there was no escape, as the very physics of the space worked against life. The absence of wooden paneling or even straw on the floor made it impossible to insulate oneself from the stone. The prisoner was forced to remain in constant contact with a surface whose temperature was approaching zero or falling below it. Even a short sleep on the bare stone could lead to fatal hypothermia of the internal organs. The kidneys and lungs were the first to suffer, with inflammatory processes beginning within a few hours. The stone sucked out energy methodically, without stopping for a second. The architecture of the prison towers also contributed to the unbearable conditions. Narrow, unglazed loopholes open to the winds created a constant draft. This icy stream blew away any residual heat that might have accumulated around the prisoner's body. The wind howled in the tower's chimney, creating additional psychological pressure. But the physical impact was worse. The wind chill effect made the temperature of 0 degrees feel like -10. In such conditions, the concept of comfort disappeared, giving way to a single task: minimizing heat loss. People instinctively sought out corners where the air movement was minimal, but the corners were just as icy. Attempts to plug the gaps with rags or their own bodies rarely worked. The cold penetrated everywhere. It was the very essence of this place. The castle, designed to protect the Lord, became a death trap for the prisoner. It is interesting to note that some chronicles mention frost covering the walls of the cells from the inside, even when there was no snow outside. This was due to the condensation of breath on the supercooled stone, creating a surreal picture of an icy crypt. The prisoner found himself walled up in an ice capsule created by his own breath. With each exhalation, the humidity increased and the chances of survival decreased. It was a vicious circle that could only be broken by death or a miracle. The thermodynamics of the stone sack left no chance for an unprepared organism. Without an external heat source, the balance inevitably shifted toward cooling. The human body, producing about 100 watts of heat at rest, could not warm the tons of surrounding granite. It was a battle between a tiny biological furnace and the infinite cold of geology. And in this battle, the stone always emerged victorious. Understanding these physical processes forces us to take a completely different view of the romantic descriptions of prisoners in towers. It was not languid, sitting by the window. It was a constant struggle against numbness. The cold was a guard who never slept and never took bribes. Have you ever thought that the walls of your apartment protect you in winter only thanks to modern technology? I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about the influence of architecture on survival? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the body shuts down in such conditions? When a person finds themselves in a cold dungeon, their body begins a series of desperate attempts to save their life, which we call hypothermia. This is not just a feeling of "I'm cold." It is a cascade of physiological reactions aimed at protecting vital organs. First, the body constricts the blood vessels in the periphery, in the hands and feet. Blood flows away from the skin and muscles, rushing to the center of the body, to the heart, lungs, and brain. The limbs become icy to the touch and lose sensitivity, turning into foreign, unresponsive objects. Fingers stop bending, and simple actions, such as trying to fasten a button, become an impossible quest. This is a protective mechanism that sacrifices the small to preserve the whole. But in prison, it became a curse. The prisoner lost the ability to rub himself, move actively, and maintain blood circulation. The numbness was replaced by pain, deep and aching, coming from the bones themselves. The next stage was uncontrollable muscle tremors, which could last for hours. This was the body's attempt to generate heat through the mechanical friction of muscle fibers. The tremors were so severe that the person could not hold a mug of water in their hands, and their teeth chattered with the risk of breaking. However, this process requires enormous energy, which the starving prisoner did not have. When glucose reserves were depleted, the tremors stopped, and this was the most frightening sign. Along with the cessation of tremors came a deceptive phase of calm and apathy. The core body temperature dropped below 35 degrees, slowing down all metabolic processes. The heart began to beat less frequently and weakly, and breathing became shallow and barely noticeable. The brain, deprived of its usual supply of warm blood, began to malfunction. Thoughts became confused, time stretched out, and the feeling of fear and the desire to fight disappeared. The person fell into a state similar to a deep narcotic sleep or trance. It might seem to them that they were in a different place, warm, at home by the fireplace. Hallucinations became vivid and comforting, replacing the harsh reality of the stone sack. It was a protective reaction of the psyche, relieving the dying person of the suffering of their last hours. At this point, the prisoner no longer felt the cold, but only an overwhelming desire to sleep. Physiologically, at this moment, there was a malfunction in the thermoregulatory center in the hypothalamus. The body ceased to understand that it was freezing and could mistakenly send a signal to dilate the blood vessels. Blood rushed to the skin, creating a powerful sensation of heat known as paradoxical undressing. People found frozen to death were often undressed, as in their final moments they felt as if they were burning. But in a stone bag, this only hastened the end. The slowing of blood flow led to blood thickening and an increased risk of thrombosis. Even if the prisoner was freed at this stage, it was almost impossible to restore their health. Tissue necrosis in the limbs, caused by prolonged vasospasm, often required amputation, but few survived until their release. Most died quietly, simply not waking up. The cold also suppressed the immune system, leaving the body defenseless against any infection. A common cold in such conditions developed into pneumonia in a matter of days. The lungs filled with fluid, and the person died of suffocation, even if the cold had not yet killed them. It was a complex attack on all life support systems. Historical chronicles often describe how prisoners were found in the fetal position. This is an instinctive attempt to reduce heat loss by curling up into the most compact ball possible. But even this position did not save them on the icy floor, only slightly delaying the inevitable. Human physiology is not designed for prolonged exposure to a highly conductive environment without protection. Death from hypothermia in a medieval prison was quiet, unlike public executions. It did not draw crowds of spectators. It took place in darkness and solitude. The body simply cooled to the temperature of the environment, becoming part of the cold interior. Did you know that it was the lack of energy and food that was the catalyst for this process? In the next chapter, you will learn how clothing became the prisoner's enemy. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of medieval clothing? In everyday life, clothing serves as protection, but in a damp stone dungeon, it became a deadly trap. Most prisoners were thrown into jail wearing whatever they had on when they were arrested, and these clothes were rarely suitable for extreme conditions. The linen used to make undergarments is highly hygroscopic, meaning it absorbs moisture very well. In the 100% humidity of the dungeon, linen fabric instantly became saturated with condensation, sticking to the body like an ice pack. Wet fabric conducts heat 20 times faster than dry fabric, effectively depriving the body of its air layer. Instead of retaining heat, wet clothing began to actively draw it away from the skin. The prisoner found himself wrapped in a cold, damp rag that drew energy from him with every passing second. It was impossible to remove it, as the air around him was even colder, and there was nowhere to dry it. This created the effect of constant cooling by evaporation, even if the temperature was not extremely low. Woolen outer clothing, if the prisoner had any, provided only a temporary advantage. Wool warms even when wet, but only up to a certain limit of moisture saturation. In the damp dungeon, heavy woolen cloaks became saturated with water, turning into unwieldy chains. The weight of wet clothing weighed on the shoulders, restricted movement, and required additional strength to carry. And strength, as we remember, was the main deficit. Footwear was a separate problem, often causing the loss of feet. Leather boots or shoes, unable to dry out, stiffened and shrunk. They disrupted blood circulation in the feet, accelerating the process of frostbite and tissue necrosis. If a prisoner was barefoot or wearing simple bandages, contact with the stone floor killed him even faster. The cold penetrated through the soles of his feet, rising up his legs and cooling his femoral arteries. The lack of changeable underwear meant that the fabric began to rot right on the person. The decomposing fibers lost their structure and thermal insulation properties, turning into rags. The dirt that accumulated in the fabric also reduced its ability to retain warm air. The clothing turned into a hard, foul-smelling crust that rubbed the skin raw but did not provide warmth. In some cases, prison guards would throw old rags or straw to prisoners for warmth. But in damp conditions, these gifts quickly turned into breeding grounds for mold and rot. Rotting organic materials released moisture, exacerbating the microclimate of the cell. A prisoner who tried to burrow into such a pile risked contracting lung disease from mold spores. Belts, ties, and laces on clothing became tightened into dead knots due to dampness, or, conversely, rotted and broke. Prisoners could not adjust their clothing to wrap themselves more tightly or loosen what was pressing on them. Any breach in the integrity of the suit gave the cold direct access to the body. Holes in the knees and elbows became gateways for pneumonia. Interestingly, wealthy prisoners who had access to fur clothing were not safe either. Fur quickly fell apart in damp conditions, losing its fluffiness and ability to retain air. The leather base of the fur began to mold and decay, emitting an unbearable odor. As a result, an expensive fur coat became as wet and cold a burden as a peasant's sheepskin coat. No tricks helped to dry the clothes with the warmth of one's own body. The heat output of an exhausted body was simply not enough to evaporate the accumulated moisture. The prisoner was in a state of permanent dampness. The skin macerated, became white and wrinkled, losing its protective functions. Any scratch on such skin turned into a non-healing ulcer. Thus, clothing in a medieval prison ceased to be a blessing and became an instrument of torture by cold. It did not provide warmth, but took away the last of the prisoner's strength, restricted movement, and contributed to the development of disease. This was a case where possession of property did not ease the prisoner's fate, but only prolonged the agony. Did you like this chapter? Don't forget to like it. What if I showed you a time machine that would transport you to a bowl of prison grub? The human body requires a tremendous amount of energy to survive in the cold. The body's internal furnace must work at full capacity to maintain a core temperature of 36.6 degrees. In modern conditions, polar explorers consume up to 5,000 to 6,000 calories per day to stay warm. A medieval prisoner received a ration that barely covered the basic needs of a person lying down in the cold. The basis of prison food was bread, often stale, mixed with bran or even sawdust. Sometimes they were given liquid porridge or soup with a few grains floating in it. The calorie content of such a diet was catastrophically low, and the fat and protein content was close to zero. Fat is the main fuel for long-term body heating in extreme conditions. Without fat, the body began to burn its own reserves. First, subcutaneous fatty tissue, which itself serves as a natural insulator, was depleted. The prisoner lost weight, losing this protective layer, and the cold began to penetrate deeper, to the muscles and organs. The person became literally transparent, their bones covered with thin skin that was unable to retain heat. Every calorie lost brought the moment of final freezing closer. The water given to prisoners was often ice cold, straight from a well or a barrel standing in the frost. Drinking such water meant voluntarily lowering one's body temperature from within. The body had to expend precious energy to warm the liquid to body temperature. It was a paradox. A person was dying of thirst, but drinking was life-threatening. The lack of hot food was a critical factor. Hot food could provide a short-term rush of heat, dilate blood vessels, and stimulate digestion. Cold, dry food only irritated the stomach and required energy to digest. Often, prisoners simply could not digest coarse food due to their slowed metabolism and died of exhaustion with a full stomach. Hunger forced the body to go into starvation mode. The heart rate slowed, body temperature dropped, and constant drowsiness set in. This is an adaptive mechanism that allows the body to stretch its energy reserves, but in a cold prison, it played into the hands of death. The less energy the body produced, the faster it cooled down. Vitamin deficiency exacerbated the situation. Scurvy and other diseases caused by poor nutrition made blood vessels brittle and skin vulnerable. Metabolism was disrupted, and even the meager food that was provided was not properly absorbed. The body lost its ability to break down nutrients to produce heat. Sometimes, as a special favor or in exchange for a bribe to a guard, a prisoner might receive a piece of fat or meat. It was a real treat, giving a few hours of warmth and life. But such cases were the exception that proved the rule. Usually, food was just a way to prolong the torment, not to save a life. Exhaustion led to the atrophy of muscles, which are the main generator of heat when shivering. The prisoner became so weak that he could no longer shiver, and that was the beginning of the end. He just lay there, not even having the strength to curl up, and the cold took the rest of his life without hindrance. The metabolic fire died out due to a lack of fuel. The link between hunger and cold was inseparable and deadly. You cannot survive in a freezer with an empty tank. In the next chapter, you will learn how prisoners tried to sleep when the floor beneath them was colder than ice. The biggest problem for prisoners was sleep, or more precisely, finding a place to sleep. The floor of the cell was almost always paved with stone, which drew heat faster than air. According to the laws of physics, heat transfers from a warmer body to a cooler one when they are in direct contact. The human body, with a temperature of 36 degrees, lay on stone with a temperature of +5 degrees. The result was predictable: massive heat loss through conduction. Most medieval dungeons did not have beds or bunks. At best, there might have been a layer of straw on the floor to serve as insulation. But this straw was rarely changed. It quickly became matted, saturated with moisture, and rotted. Wet straw lost its insulating properties and became nothing more than dirty bedding. Prisoners tried to sleep sitting up. leaning against each other if there were several of them. This reduced the area of contact with the cold floor, but put strain on their backs and legs. It was impossible to sleep standing up, and sooner or later fatigue would knock a person down onto the stones. Every minute of sleep on such a floor cost a huge amount of energy. Those who had raincoats tried to put them under themselves, sacrificing the cover above. This was a logical solution, as heat loss through the floor was greater than through the air. But the raincoat was thin, and the stone was merciless. After an hour, the cold penetrated any fabric, causing a person to wake up from pain in their frozen sides. Sometimes the floor of the cell was not just stone, but earth. The earth was softer, but even more damp and cold. It literally sucked the juices out of the body, and it was common to wake up after a night on the damp ground with pneumonia or kidney inflammation. The earthen floor turned into a muddy mess in which the prisoner was forced to exist around the clock. The lack of elevation above the floor meant being in the coldest air zone. As we know, cold air sinks. Prisoners lying on the floor breathed the coldest air in the room. The temperature difference between the floor and the head level of a standing person could be several degrees, but there was nowhere to lie higher. In overcrowded cells, prisoners used the bodies of their dead comrades as insulation from the floor until the guards took the corpses away. It sounds gruesome, but it was the only way to survive, to create a layer between themselves and the stone. The instinct for self-preservation overcame any moral norms and disgust. Constant hypothermia of the pelvic area led to serious diseases of the genitourinary system. Chronic cystitis and nephritis tormented the prisoners, turning every trip to the toilet into torture. The pain prevented sleep, further exhausting the nervous system. The stone floor was the final authority, a tombstone on which a living person lay, waiting for the end. It never warmed up, no matter how long they lay on it. It was an endless abyss, absorbing heat without a trace. Sleep, which should bring rest, turned into a dangerous period when control over the body weakened. Many fell asleep on this floor and never woke up again, passing from sleep to eternal rest unnoticed. The floor was the quietest and most effective killer in the castle. Are you ready for the shocking truth that fresh air was a death sentence? The architecture of medieval castles included narrow ventilation openings or loopholes, which served as the only source of light and air. There was no glass in prisons at that time. It was replaced by bars or simply open holes in the masonry. This created a constant, relentless draft that pierced the cell through and through. The wind rushing into the narrow opening of the loophole accelerated, creating a wind tunnel effect. Even if it was just a cool breeze outside, inside it turned into an icy stream that hit the prisoners directly. It was impossible to hide from this stream in a small stone bag. The air circulated constantly, preventing any warm air layer from forming around their bodies. In winter, these openings were often covered with snow, which melted and dripped inside, adding water to the floor. If the snow did not melt, it blocked the opening, depriving the prisoners of oxygen. But even an icy plug could not completely stop the cold. The walls around the opening froze through, covered with a crust of ice. Attempts to cover the loophole with their bodies or clothing were suppressed by the guards, or were physically impossible due to the height of the window. And even if they covered the opening, the prisoners condemned themselves to suffocation in the stale, damp air. It was a choice between slow freezing and rapid carbon dioxide poisoning. In the cells located in the tall towers, the wind was particularly strong. There, the whistling of the wind never stopped for a minute, getting on the nerves and depriving prisoners of sleep. The constant noise of the wind became the soundtrack of death, drowning out moans and cries for help. In such air prisons, death from hypothermia came most quickly. The wind chill factor made the situation catastrophic. At an air temperature of 0 degrees and strong winds, the body lost heat as if it were -15 outside. The skin became chapped, cracked, and bled. Eyes watered and became inflamed from the constant flow of cold air. If by some miracle a fire was lit in the cell, which was rare, the smoke did not always escape through the loophole. Often the wind blew it back, and the prisoners suffocated in the acrid smoke, coughing and crying. Attempts to warm up turned into torture by suffocation. The ventilation worked only in one direction, letting in the cold. Drafts blew the warmth out from under their clothes, penetrating every sleeve and pant leg. No matter how warm their clothes were, they could not protect them from the wind. People felt naked in the face of the elements. The feeling of piercing cold did not leave them for a second. It was the drafts that were the main cause of mass pneumonia and bronchitis. The lungs were constantly ventilated with icy air, immunity fell, and disease took hold of the weakened body. It was physiologically impossible to survive in a draft without a source of heat. The wind was an invisible scourge that lashed the prisoners around the clock. It penetrated the deepest corners of the dungeon, reminding them that the castle walls did not protect them, but only held the victims in place of execution with cold. Have you ever thought that even in the dungeon, where there was no wind, the cold was different, more intense? In the next chapter, you will learn about the silent horror of the oubliettes. Oubliettes, or the place of oblivion, was a deep well in the castle's foundation where prisoners were lowered on a rope. There was no wind here, but the absolute grave cold of the earth reigned supreme. The temperature in such a well was constant throughout the year, about +8 degrees Celsius. This may not seem like such a terrible cold, but it is this temperature that is the most insidious for a motionless person. There was no sunlight in the dungeon to give even the illusion of warmth. The absolute darkness intensified the feeling of cold, as sensory deprivation caused the brain to react more acutely to thermal discomfort. The person was left alone with the damp, earthy coolness that enveloped them like a shroud. The walls of the well, which went deep into the ground, constantly oozed moisture. Water dripped from above, ran down the walls, and pooled at the bottom. The prisoner often sat or stood in ankle-deep water, which guaranteed hypothermia of the feet and rapid death. Foot rot, known as trench foot, developed rapidly here. There was no change between day and night, no daily temperature fluctuations. The cold was monotonous, a constant pressure that was impossible to get used to. The body got no respite. There was no moment of warming when one could relax. It was endless temperature pressure. The air in the cell was heavy, saturated with earth vapors and excrement. The high concentration of methane and carbon dioxide caused headaches and weakness, reducing the body's resistance to cold. The slow metabolism slowed down even more in this suffocating atmosphere. Sounds from above barely reached the bottom, creating a vacuum of silence. The prisoner could hear only his own breathing and the chattering of his teeth. The psychological pressure of knowing that you were buried alive in an icy pit broke your will to live faster than the physical cold. Apathy set in almost instantly. In such conditions, clothing rotted at an incredible rate. The fabric disintegrated into fibers, and the skin became covered with mold. The person merged with the mud at the bottom, losing their human form. They became just another cold object in a cold space. The only way to keep warm was through physical exercise, but the confined space of the well often did not even allow one to stand up straight. The prisoner was forced to sit hunched over, which disrupted blood flow and accelerated freezing. Immobility in the dampness was a guaranteed death sentence. Surviving in an oubliette in winter was a miracle. The walls froze from the ground up, and the temperature could drop to 0. The water at the bottom turned into an icy slush. It was a torture chamber where the instrument was the very nature of the dungeon. The bodies of those who died in the dungeons were often not removed for years. They decomposed slowly due to the cold, creating a gruesome company for new prisoners. It was the bottom of the world, where cold was the master and man was a temporary guest. Often the merciless cold of iron was added to the freezing cold of the stone walls. Shackles and chains not only restricted the prisoner's freedom, they also acted as a powerful additional factor in cooling the body. Metal has high thermal conductivity, and when in contact with warm skin, instantly draws precious heat away. Iron sucked the life out much faster than just cold air. Heavy iron bracelets, tightly encircling the wrists and ankles, acted as real radiators of cold. They cooled the blood directly at the sites of pulsation of large arteries, where the vessels come close to the skin. The cooled blood spread throughout the body, lowering the overall temperature of the internal organs. The person froze not from the outside, but from the inside. In particularly harsh winters, the metal in the unheated dungeon could literally freeze to damp skin. This caused chemical burns, and tore off the upper layers of the epidermis with any movement. These wounds did not heal for months, constantly bleeding, festering, and becoming inflamed from dirt. Every morning began with the excruciating pain of tearing the iron from the body. Constant contact with the icy iron caused deep, aching pain in the joints and bones, which prevented sleep. The cold penetrated through the soft tissues directly into the periosteum. Severe rheumatism became a prisoner's constant companion after just a couple of weeks of imprisonment. People began to feel changes in the weather through their own pain. But perhaps the main problem was not even the contact with the metal itself, but the severe restriction of mobility. Movement for any living creature is life and the only source of heat. Muscle work generates the necessary energy, accelerates blood flow, and prevents the body from cooling down completely. Chained to the wall with a short leash or strapped to a heavy core, a person was deprived of the opportunity to move actively. He could not jump up and down to warm himself, could not wave his arms energetically or rub his shoulders. He could not even take a short run from corner to corner of the cell. Such forced immobility inevitably led to dangerous blood stagnation in the body. The limbs quickly swelled, became heavy, turned blue, and lost all sensitivity. Slow, thick blood cooled faster, and the deadly cold penetrated deeper and deeper into the tissues. The person turned into a motionless statue, slowly cooling to the temperature of the environment. The chains were often deliberately made short, forcing the prisoner to remain in an uncomfortable, crouched position for days on end. The tension in the muscles in such a static position did not warm the body, but only exhausted it to the limit. All energy was spent not on heating, but on trying to maintain balance. When their strength was finally exhausted, the person hung limply on the chains cutting into their body. This further disrupted the already poor blood circulation by constricting the vessels. The limbs became numb, and the risk of frostbite increased many times over. Often the fingers and toes turned black and died. Massive neck blocks or special devices, such as the so-called scriptki, made it difficult to even breathe normally. The compressed chest could not fill the lungs with air. The lack of oxygen reduced the intensity of oxidative processes in the body, which meant that the production of internal heat also fell. The prisoner was simultaneously suffocating and freezing. Some prisons practiced particularly cruel chaining to the floor. The person was forced to lie on an icy stone constantly, unable to even sit up or roll over onto their other side. The stone drew heat from below and the air from above, leaving no chance of survival. This was the most ruthless form of torture by cold, usually leading to a painful death within a few days. The body simply gave up, unable to warm itself or the icy floor slabs. Often, such prisoners were found in the morning already frozen to the floor. Rust from the rough chains inevitably got into the open wounds from the shackles, causing severe blood poisoning. Weakened by constant cold and hunger, the body could not fight even the simplest infection. Immunity dropped to zero. A high fever set in, which could have warmed a person in bed, but here it worked against them. The heat only burned the last resources of the exhausted body faster, without providing any real warmth. The person burned up in fever, continuing to shiver from the cold. Iron was a symbol of captivity, but in a cold prison, it became part of the physical process of destruction. It greedily took away warmth, restricted life-saving movements, and added physical pain. It was a real ice cuff put on life itself. Even if a prisoner was miraculously freed from his shackles, his atrophied muscles and stiff joints could not recover for a long time. Often, people remained hunched over, unable to straighten their backs. Cold and immobility made a person disabled, even if he survived. The cold affected not only the body, but also the mind. Constant discomfort and the inability to warm up even for a second led to rapid mental exhaustion. The will to live, the main engine of survival, froze along with the fingers. Depression and apathy covered the prisoner with a thick blanket of hopelessness. The person stopped caring about themselves. They stopped trying to rub their hands, fix their clothes, or eat their meager rations. They didn't care anymore. This state of indifference was the first step toward death. The brain, conserving energy, shut down unnecessary emotions and desires. In the darkness and cold, the sense of time was lost. Hours stretched into days, days into eternity. The prisoner did not know how long he had been freezing or how long it would last. The uncertainty was frightening and paralyzed the will. Hallucinations caused by brain hypothermia could be frightening or, conversely, alluring. Prisoners talked to non-existent interlocutors, saw the warm sun, smelled food. The mind fled from the icy reality into a world of dreams. Irritability gave way to complete lethargy. A person could stare at one point for hours, unresponsive to external stimuli. The guards could beat him, shout at him, but he no longer felt pain or fear. He was already halfway there. The feeling of loneliness in the cold was particularly acute. It seemed as if the whole world had forgotten about you, left you to die in this refrigerator. The absence of human warmth nearby was perceived as physical pain. Those who gave up psychologically died first. Those who retained anger, hope, or faith held on longer. The psyche could force the body to squeeze the last drops of energy from its reserves, but even those were not limitless. The cold erased personality. People forgot their names, their pasts, turning into trembling lumps of instinct. All complex thought processes stopped, leaving only the primitive, cold. Watching their cellmates die also undermined their spirit. Seeing someone nearby turn into an ice statue meant seeing their own future. The fear of death was mixed with envy for those who had already suffered. Psychological death often came before physical death. A person died inside when they realized that there would never be warmth again, and after that, the body simply completed the process of fading away. And yet, despite the monstrous conditions, people managed to survive. History knows striking examples of prisoners who spent many years in such icy crypts and came out alive. How did they manage it when nature itself was against them? One of the main factors in their survival was collective thermoregulation, working at the level of animal instincts. If there were many people in a cell, they would huddle together in a dense moving heap, warming each other with their bodies. In the very center of this living mass, the temperature could be quite bearable even in severe frost. To survive, they developed a strict system of rotation. Those who warmed up inside the circle voluntarily moved to the cold outer edge, letting their frozen comrades inside. Such behavior required an unexpectedly high level of social organization and human solidarity. A cruel law operated in the prison. Loners and egoists perished first, while organized groups survived. This living tangle was the only available heater in the stone bag. The thermal radiation of a dozen bodies could actually raise the air temperature in a small volume by a few life-saving degrees. Another effective method was constant, exhausting physical activity. Some prisoners forced themselves to walk from corner to corner, squat, or do push-ups until they were completely exhausted. They did this as long as their muscles had any strength left. It was the only way to mechanically convert the meager calories of prison grub into heat. Those who stopped and sat down on the floor risked never getting up again. Movement was hard work, but it got the blood flowing and kept the heart from slowing down. People literally ran in place for hours to avoid stiffness. The prisoners' ingenuity in finding warmth knew no bounds. The use of dry grass, moss, straw, and even ordinary dust with cobwebs helped to create at least some protection. The prisoners diligently stuffed all this under their shirts and pants, creating a life-saving air gap. From the outside, they looked like ridiculous, bloated scarecrows. But this trick worked better than just wet linen on bare skin. The air trapped between the blades of grass retained body heat. Any scrap of wool or felt found in the cell was worth its weight in gold. Hardening and habituation to the cold also played a huge role in natural selection. People from the lower classes, accustomed since childhood to living in poorly heated, windswept huts, endured the prison cold more easily. Their bodies were tougher and more resilient than those of the pampered aristocrats, accustomed to fireplaces and feather beds. The bodies of the poor adapted more quickly to extreme conditions, learning to conserve energy. Their metabolism changed, and they fell into a state similar to light hibernation. The rich, on the other hand, often died of pneumonia in the first few weeks. Psychological tricks were no less important than warm clothing. Prayer, deep meditation, composing poetry in one's mind, or solving mathematical problems all helped to preserve sanity. A strong spirit made the heart beat more evenly and the blood flow faster through the veins. Sometimes, if you were lucky, you could negotiate with the prison guards. An extra armful of rotten straw, a piece of old felt, or simply permission to cover a narrow loophole with a wooden shield. All this could be bought. The last money hidden in clothes or promises of future rewards were used. The human factor sometimes proved stronger than stone walls and instructions. Some guards, out of pity or for a bribe, brought hot coals in a clay pot. This small act of kindness could prolong a prisoner's life by several days. A critical skill was the ability to sleep in short bursts, known as dog sleep. It was necessary to wake up every half hour to move around, rub your limbs, and get your blood flowing. Those who knew how to control their sleep did not freeze to death, lost in slumber. Deep sleep in the cold was deadly dangerous, as body temperature drops during sleep. It was a constant, exhausting vigilance on the verge of nervous exhaustion. A person had to be his own guardian, not allowing himself to relax for a minute. Survival in such conditions was always a lottery, where the stakes were life itself, and the odds were always against the player. But the human body is amazingly resilient and adaptable. Sometimes it performed real biological miracles, defying all known laws of physics and medicine. The story of survival in a medieval prison is a true hymn to human fortitude and the thirst for life. It is proof that even in an icy hell, the spark of life can smolder for years if there is an iron will to sustain it. Medieval prisons were perfectly designed machines for killing with cold. Stone, dampness, wind, and hunger worked in deadly harmony, slowly but surely extinguishing the lives of prisoners. It was not a quick death by the sword, but a painful, long decline, devoid of any heroism. We often romanticize castles, forgetting that their walls hold the memory of thousands of people who simply froze to death in the dark. Cold was the most terrible executioner because it was impersonal, inevitable, and omnipresent. Could you survive in such conditions for even a day? Or have modern conveniences made us too vulnerable in the face of primitive cold? Share your opinion in the comments, suggest topics for future videos you would like to see, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to learn about the dark side of history.